Hello, dear listener. Before we begin our slow journey tonight, let me kindly ask you for a little support. If you enjoy calm stories that help you relax, please give this video a like. If you would like to hear more of these sleepy histories, consider subscribing to the channel, and I would love if you could leave a comment, sharing from which city you are listening. It is always wonderful to see how many places come together here, in this quiet corner of the internet. And now, let us begin. Imagine that it is neither day nor night, but a soft in-between hour, where the sky carries the pale colors of dawn. You are standing at the base of a mountain so high that its peaks seem to vanish into the clouds. This is Olympus, the legendary home of the gods. The air is thin here, cool and filled with the faint sound of wind moving slowly through rocks and trees. Your footsteps are gentle, and each one brings you a little higher, a little closer to a world that feels both familiar and distant. The path is not steep, but steady, as though it wishes to prepare you for what lies above. You notice the silence. No rush of voices, no clatter of markets, only the occasional bird gliding past, its wings catching the early light. The higher you climb, the more the earth below fades from your thoughts. Villages and fields seem far away, almost like a memory. Instead, there is only the sound of the mountain itself, a quiet hum, like a song that has been sung for thousands of years. As the clouds draw nearer, you step into their soft embrace. The mist curls around you, cool against your skin, but gentle, almost protective. The world is blurred, but peaceful. Each breath feels like it belongs to a slower rhythm, one that is not rushed by clocks or human concerns. And then, faintly, you see a glow above. The clouds part, and you glimpse golden rooftops shining softly, not with brilliance, but with the steady warmth of a fire that has always been burning. These are the halls of Zeus, the king of gods. They do not shout of power, but whisper of timelessness. Pillars rise, not heavy, but graceful, carrying a calm weight of eternity. You have reached Olympus, where the stories of thunder and desire, of love and anger, quietly wait to be told. Chapter 1. Zeus, the king with human weaknesses. When we think of Zeus, we often imagine thunder in the sky, a flash of lightning, and the deep, commanding voice of a ruler who held all of Olympus in his power. And in many ways, that picture is true. Zeus was the king of gods, the one who decided the fate of mortals and immortals alike. He is remembered as the lord of the sky, the keeper of storms, and the final authority in the order of the divine world. Yet, beneath that crown of clouds and thunder, there was another side to Zeus. It was a side that was very human, filled with desire, with weaknesses, and with longings that often overpowered even his own sense of judgment. This is perhaps what makes him one of the most fascinating figures in mythology. Unlike a flawless figure carved in marble, Zeus was never perfect. He was mighty, yes, but he was also restless. He was feared, but he was also mocked. He stood above the gods, yet he was pulled down time and time again by his own appetites. This mixture of grandeur and flaw is what allowed ancient storytellers to shape him, not only as a king, but also as a mirror of humanity itself. If we imagine Zeus seated on his great throne at the heart of Olympus, it is not difficult to see both sides of his nature. Around him, the other gods gathered. Some looked at him with reverence, for he was their leader. Others carried private resentments, for his authority often clashed with their own ambitions. Even his wife Hera, who shared his throne, did not look upon him with simple loyalty. Their union was heavy with conflict, with arguments whispered behind closed doors and shouted across the halls of Olympus. To the mortals below, however, Zeus was still the figure of majesty. Farmers prayed to him for rain, sailors asked him for safe winds, and rulers looked to him as the symbol of order in the universe. But when the prayers rose upward, when sacrifices were laid upon the altars, Zeus was not always listening as a stern judge. Very often, he was distracted by other matters that had little to do with justice or governance. His gaze wandered, not only across the skies, but down into the lives of both gods and mortals. He sought beauty, companionship, and adventure in places far removed from his throne. And it is in this restlessness that we begin to see the flaws that defined him as much as his thunderbolt did. The ancient poets rarely tried to hide this. They told stories of Zeus not only as the ruler of storms, but also as a god who pursued his desires with great determination. He could not resist the charm of a goddess, nor the quiet beauty of a mortal woman. He would disguise himself, change his shape, and move between worlds in order to win the affection he sought. It was said that he could become a swan gliding across a lake, or a bull with shining white flanks, or even a golden rain falling silently through the night. These tales were not only about transformation, they were about longing, about the way even the greatest of gods was pulled by forces that were older and stronger than reason itself. And yet, in each story, we can feel the tension between the power he held and the weakness he could not escape. For every time Zeus gave in to his desires, he also stirred conflict. Hera's jealousy grew sharper with each tale. The other gods whispered, sometimes with amusement, sometimes with disapproval. Mortals found themselves caught in the web of divine attention. Their lives changed forever because the king of Olympus had turned his eyes toward them. To understand Zeus fully, we must hold these two images together. On one side, there is the ruler with the thunderbolt in his hand, deciding the balance of storms and clear skies, war and peace, justice and mercy. On the other side, there is the figure of a restless god, wandering from one love to another, unable to quiet the desires that lived within him. It is this duality that makes Zeus more than just a symbol of power. It makes him a character with depth, with contradictions, and with a story that speaks not only of divinity, but also of human nature. In the slow rhythm of Greek mythology, Zeus's weaknesses were not always seen as simple failures. Instead, they became part of the great web of myths, weaving together gods, heroes, and mortals in one long chain of cause and effect. From his many unions came children who shaped the course of legend. Heroes like Heracles, Perseus, and Helen, whose lives would fill countless tales. Without Zeus's flaws, there would be no such stories, no heroes to admire, no conflicts to ponder. His weaknesses, in other words, were as creative as his strengths. They gave rise to new adventures, new struggles, and new lessons for those who listened to the old stories. And so, when we picture him seated in his hall, with thunder at his side and the world at his feet, it is worth remembering that his true nature was not only about command. It was also about the quiet, persistent pull of desire, about the moments when the king of gods set aside his crown and followed his heart, even if it led to chaos. That is why the Greeks told his tales with such richness. They did not want a god who was too far above them, too perfect to understand. They wanted a god who reflected the struggles they knew, a god whose power was balanced by weakness, and whose greatness was made more real by imperfection. When you close your eyes and imagine Zeus now, try not to hear only the thunder. Try to hear the quieter sounds as well, the footsteps of a god moving in disguise through the mortal world, the whispers of gods on Olympus, the sighs of Hera as she bore yet another betrayal. In these softer sounds, you may discover the essence of Zeus, not only as a king of heaven, but as a figure who was always searching, always reaching, never fully satisfied, and never entirely free from the flaws that made him so enduring in memory. The ancient world was never in doubt of his authority, but they also never doubted his humanity. For in Zeus, they saw the greatest of contradictions, a ruler who could command the sky, yet who could not command himself. And it is this contradiction that ensured his place, not just in temples of stone, but in the imagination of all who listened to the stories of his life. Chapter 2. Marriage with Hera and the Endless Strife. The union of Zeus and Hera is one of the most famous in Greek mythology, not because it was a picture of perfect harmony, but because it was the opposite. Their marriage was not gentle, nor was it calm. It was a relationship marked by thunder, not only in the skies above, but also in the private chambers of Olympus. And yet, for all of its turbulence, it remained at the center of the divine order, as though the constant tension between them was itself a form of balance, a rhythm as old as the earth. When we imagine Hera beside Zeus, we must first recall who she was. Hera was not merely his wife, chosen from among the goddesses. She was the queen of the heavens, the protector of marriage, the guardian of family and fidelity. She was regal, dignified, and formidable. Her presence was commanding, not through violence or storm, but through quiet strength and the authority of tradition. She represented order where Zeus embodied chaos, permanence where he embodied desire. And so, their union was destined to be both powerful and fraught with difficulty, for the two forces could never fully live in peace. The myths tell us that their marriage was celebrated with grandeur, a union meant to unite the sky with its queen. The gods attended, and the earth was said to have offered blossoms as gifts. Mortals imagined it as the highest example of sacred bond, as though even the immortals themselves must live by the order of wedlock. But this image, bright as it was, soon dimmed in the stories that followed. For no sooner had Hera become Zeus's queen than she discovered the nature of the man she had married, or rather, the god she had tied herself to. Zeus was not constant in affection. His gaze wandered, as it always had, drawn to beauty wherever he found it, whether in the halls of Olympus or on the fields of the mortal world. Hera, bound to him not only by marriage, but also by her own pride and dignity, could not bear this betrayal. The result was a marriage in which love and strife walked hand in hand. There were moments of unity, yes, but they were overshadowed by endless conflict. The halls of Olympus echoed with their disputes, disputes that were not whispered in corners but spoken aloud for all to hear. The stories tell us that Hera's jealousy was fierce, and her anger was sharp. She could not strike Zeus directly, for his power was unmatched, but she often turned her wrath upon those who had caught his wandering eye. Mortal women who found themselves loved by Zeus suffered greatly from Hera's punishments. Goddesses, too, were not spared, nor were the children born of Zeus's many affairs. It was not only jealousy that moved her, but also the sense of insult, the wound to her dignity, the humiliation of being queen in name but not in fidelity. For mortals, this union must have seemed strangely familiar. They prayed to Zeus and Hera, knowing their powers, but they also listened to the tales of their quarrels. To them, perhaps, it was a reminder that even the greatest beings in the cosmos were not free from strife in marriage. The farmers and townsfolk who told these stories might have smiled knowingly, recognizing in the gods the same struggles they found in their own homes. Anger, disappointment, and the fragile attempt to hold together what was always at risk of breaking apart. And yet, for all the conflict, Zeus and Hera remained together. Their bond was unbroken, even if it was never peaceful. Why was this so? Perhaps it was because their union was symbolic. Hera's role as queen could not be replaced. No other goddess could carry the weight of her authority. Zeus may have wandered, but he could not truly abandon her, for her presence legitimized his throne. Together, they embodied both sides of divine life, the storm and the calm, the chaos of desire and the permanence of tradition. Their marriage, however flawed, was the foundation of Olympus. There were stories, too, of Hera's attempts to defy her husband. Once, it was said, she conspired with other gods to overthrow Zeus, binding him in chains while he slept. But the plot was discovered, and Zeus's wrath was terrible. Hera was punished, humbled, yet she did not yield in spirit. Her defiance showed that even in the face of supreme power, she remained unbroken, her pride intact. This too became part of her image, the goddess who suffered, who burned with anger, but who refused to be silenced. If we picture their marriage, we must imagine not a tranquil household, but a court alive with tension. Servants and minor gods moved carefully, for any day could bring quarrels between their king and queen. Some of the disputes were loud, like thunder rolling across the sky. Others were silent, like the heavy stillness before a storm. Hera's eyes carried judgment, sharp and cold. Zeus's temper flared, then calmed, like lightning followed by clear skies. This rhythm repeated endlessly, like the seasons, like the tides. In this constant strife, however, there was also a kind of strange endurance. For despite his flaws, Zeus respected Hera's strength, and despite her anger, Hera remained at his side. They were bound not by harmony, but by necessity, by the recognition that neither could be without the other. This truth lies quietly in the heart of their story, that even conflict can create stability, and even discord can bind two beings together. The ancient poets did not tell their tales of strife only to amuse. They used them to explain the world around them. The storms of the sky were not random. They were the echoes of divine quarrels. The suffering of mortals who caught Zeus's eye was not meaningless. It was part of a larger pattern of jealousy and vengeance. Through Zeus and Hera, the Greeks explained both the power of love and the inevitability of suffering. Their marriage was a myth, but it was also a reflection of life itself. And so, when we remember Zeus and Hera, we must not imagine them seated side by side in quiet devotion. Instead, we should picture them in the midst of argument, their voices rising, their wills clashing, yet their bond unbroken. For this was their story, a union of endless strife, yet a union that endured, shaping not only their own lives, but the fate of gods and mortals alike. When you close your eyes tonight, you might imagine walking through the golden halls of Olympus. You might hear, faintly, the echo of raised voices drifting from behind the great doors. It is the quarrel of Zeus and Hera, a quarrel that has lasted for ages, never ending, never resolved, and yet never destroying the bond between them. And perhaps, in that echo, you may find a strange kind of calm. For if even the king and queen of the heavens could not escape strife, then perhaps strife is simply part of existence, not to be feared, but to be understood as part of the rhythm of life itself. Chapter 3. Disguises of Desire. When one thinks of Zeus, the image that often comes to mind is that of the thunderbolt-bearing king of the gods. Tall, powerful, his beard thick, his gaze commanding, the sky itself bending to his will. And yet, there is another side to his mythic portrait. For beneath the grandeur of the ruler, there was a figure restless, endlessly driven by longing. And longing, in his case, was not satisfied by simple declarations or the display of might. Instead, it often led him into strange paths, paths where power and passion intertwined, and where disguise became a language of desire. Zeus, though unmatched in authority, rarely approached love in the open. Perhaps it was because he understood that his thunderous form, magnificent as it was, could inspire more fear than affection. Perhaps it was because secrecy brought him a thrill that pure dominance could not. Or perhaps, as the stories quietly suggest, even the mightiest of beings felt the need to conceal, to transform, to appear as something other than himself when he sought closeness with another. Whatever the reason, the myths that have survived tell us that Zeus was a god of disguises. One of the most famous tales speaks of Europa, a mortal princess whose beauty was said to outshine the flowers of her homeland. Zeus desired her, but how could he approach without alerting Hera, without frightening Europa herself? The answer, in the language of myth, was transformation. He became a bull, not a savage beast, snorting and stamping, but a white bull of such gentleness and radiance that it seemed touched by divinity. Europa, seeing him, felt no fear. She reached out to stroke his coat, to rest upon his back, and as she did, the bull carried her away across the sea to Crete, where Zeus revealed himself. The image is strange, and to our modern minds, even unsettling. Yet in the ancient telling, it carried layers of meaning. The bull was a symbol of strength, virility, and kingship. By appearing in this form, Zeus displayed qualities that both concealed and revealed his nature. The disguise was not random. It was chosen carefully, a mask that fit the role he wished to play. Europa's trust was won not by thunderbolts, but by gentleness disguised within power. Another story tells of Leda, the queen of Sparta. Here, Zeus took on the shape of a swan. Not the mighty eagle, not the lion, but a swan, gliding softly over water, feathers gleaming in the sun. As the myth goes, the encounter led to the birth of children who would themselves shape Greek legend, among them Helen, whose beauty sparked the Trojan War. The choice of disguise again speaks to something subtle. The swan is graceful, almost fragile, and yet beneath its elegance lies an untamed wildness. In this form, Zeus became not the threatening ruler of the skies, but the embodiment of beauty, serenity, and allure. And then there is the tale of Danae, a mortal princess locked away by her father in a bronze chamber, hidden from the world. For her father had been told by prophecy that a child of Danae would one day bring about his downfall. To prevent this, he sealed her away, thinking her unreachable. But Zeus was not deterred. No chains, no walls, no bronze tower could hold back his will. And so he became something impossible to contain. A golden rain, streaming through the cracks, slipping through the smallest spaces, until it filled the chamber with light. From that union came Perseus, the hero destined to slay the Gorgon Medusa. This image, too, carries more than one meaning. The golden rain was not only a disguise, but a symbol of the unstoppable nature of desire, flowing where it will, seeping through barriers that no human hand can hold against it. Gold itself, dazzling and radiant, spoke of divine favor and irresistible attraction. Zeus, by choosing this form, reminded mortals that the will of the gods could not be confined by earthly fears or human attempts at control. It is worth pausing here to consider why disguise became so central to these stories. Was it merely a narrative device, a way to make each tale vivid and memorable? Perhaps, but myths were not told only for entertainment. They carried meaning, and the disguises of Zeus, can be read as symbols of how desire itself takes on many faces. Sometimes it is powerful, like the bull. Sometimes it is graceful, like the swan. Sometimes it is intangible, like the golden rain. Each disguise reflects not only the god's will, but also the many shapes that longing can take in human life. There were other transformations as well, less famous, but no less curious. In some tales, Zeus became an eagle, soaring high and swift, seizing what he desired with talons sharp and sure. In others, he took the form of a humble mortal, a stranger whose presence went unnoticed until the moment of revelation. Always, the theme was the same: power hidden in another skin, desire cloaked in a borrowed form. The ancients, who told and retold these stories, may have smiled knowingly. They recognized in Zeus's disguises the hidden masks of passion in their own lives. Desire, after all, is rarely straightforward. It often conceals itself, appearing in one guise or another, presenting itself in forms that may be gentle, deceptive, or overwhelming. By wrapping their god stories in these transformations, the Greeks gave shape to truths that they saw reflected in the world around them. And yet, there was always consequence. For Hera, these disguises were further proof of betrayal. To mortals, they were moments of both wonder and suffering. For those touched by Zeus's transformations, rarely lived ordinary lives afterward. They bore children of destiny, or they bore the wrath of Hera, or they bore the memory of a divine encounter that set them apart forever. To encounter Zeus in disguise was to be forever changed, for better or worse. When we imagine these myths in the quiet of the night, it is possible to let go of their sharper edges and simply drift with their imagery. The white bull moving gently through a meadow, the swan gliding silently across a lake, the shower of golden light filling a darkened chamber. These are images that linger, dreamlike, soft and strange. They are not only tales of desire, but also visions of transformation, where one form melts into another, where nothing is fixed, and where even the king of gods must become something else to fulfill his longing. And perhaps that is the deepest lesson of all, that power alone is not enough, that even Zeus, with his thunderbolts and his rule over heaven and earth, felt the need to disguise himself. Desire demands transformation. Love, or something like it, requires more than strength. It requires the ability to appear in a different light, to adapt, to shape oneself to the moment. In that way, the disguises of Zeus are not only stories of divine adventures, but reminders of the masks we all wear, the roles we all play, in pursuit of closeness and connection. So as you listen to these tales, let them drift through your mind not as loud scandals, but as soft images, as symbols of a god who could not remain fixed in one shape. Think of the bull, the swan, the golden rain, and let them become part of the quiet landscape of your imagination. They are not stories to be rushed, but to be wandered through slowly, like walking among shifting clouds. And in their quiet strangeness, they may even lull you towards sleep, where dreams themselves are a kind of disguise, a transformation of the waking world into something softer, something less certain, and something endlessly changeable. Chapter 4. The Many Loves Among Goddesses and Nymphs. When one listens to the myths of ancient Greece, one cannot help but notice how often they return to the theme of love, its beauty, its strife, its unexpected turns. And at the center of so many of these tales stands Zeus, whose passions knew no boundary of heaven or earth. Mortals tell of his disguises, which allowed him to approach princesses and queens. But even among the divine, his heart and his longing wandered. Goddesses, radiant and eternal, and nymphs, gentle spirits of the forests, rivers and mountains, found themselves drawn into the stories of Zeus. Each romance carried its own weight. Some ended in new life, producing children who would themselves shape the tapestry of Greek legend. Others ended in sorrow or in Hera's anger, the ever-watchful queen who saw in each union another betrayal. To understand Zeus's loves among the goddesses and nymphs is to glimpse another side of Greek myth, not the thunderbolt or the storm, but the quieter ripples that spread outward when love or desire touched the divine world. These stories were not only about passion, they were about lineage, about the creation of new figures who filled the world with myths, and about the endless interplay of jealousy, devotion, and fate. One of the most enduring tales speaks of Zeus and Mnemosyne, the goddess of memory. Their union was not one of disguise or secrecy, but of deliberate purpose. From this bond came the Muses, 9 daughters whose gifts shaped the arts of song, poetry, history, and inspiration itself. The ancients told this story to explain why creativity and memory were inseparable. Why to sing of the past was also to preserve it. In this myth, Zeus is not the restless seeker, but the father of culture, planting seeds that would blossom into the very spirit of Greek imagination. There was also Demeter, the goddess of the harvest, whose bond with Zeus brought forth Persephone, later the queen of the underworld. The story of Persephone's abduction by Hades may be better known, but behind it lies the quieter truth of her parentage. She was the daughter of sky and earth, of thunder and grain, and thus her fate carried both the weight of power and the cycles of life and death. From a single union between Zeus and Demeter arose the central myth explaining the turning of the seasons, the descent into winter, and the return of spring. In such stories, one sees that the loves of Zeus were never without consequence. They were woven into the very fabric of how the Greeks explained their world. Leto, too, was beloved of Zeus, though her tale was marked by hardship. When Hera discovered that Leto carried Zeus's children, she sought to prevent her from finding a place to give birth. Wandering across the land, turned away again and again, Leto finally found refuge on the floating island of Delos, where she bore twins, Apollo and Artemis. These two would become among the most significant of Olympian gods. The radiant archer Apollo, master of prophecy, music, and healing, and Artemis, the huntress, protector of wild creatures and of the young. Once again, a union of Zeus shaped the balance of divine order, and once again it bore the mark of Hera's unrelenting anger. Among the nymphs too, Zeus found companions. Echo, a mountain nymph known for her voice, crossed his path. Some stories suggest that Zeus, seeking to distract Hera, would converse at length with Echo, allowing him moments of freedom. Hera, perceiving this, punished the nymph by taking away her speech, leaving her only with the power to repeat the last words she heard. In this way, even the lightest associations of Zeus could alter the course of another's life forever, turning a once joyous voice into a sorrowful echo through the hills. There were others. Maya, a gentle mountain nymph, whose union with Zeus produced Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods. Born in a cave, clever from the start, Hermes grew to embody both mischief and guidance, the patron of travelers and traders. To the Greeks, the story of Maya and Zeus explained why even the simplest, humblest nymph could become the mother of a god who would shape the lives of mortals. Zeus's love for nymphs also gave rise to lesser-known tales that carried their own quiet beauty. From Callisto, a nymph devoted to Artemis, came a story of transformation and sorrow. When Hera, or in some versions Artemis herself, discovered her pregnancy. Callisto was turned into a bear. Later, she was set among the stars as Ursa Major, the Great Bear, her fate preserved in the night sky for all to see. In this way, even a fleeting love of Zeus could end not in joy, but in eternal remembrance. For the Greeks, such tales were not only diversions, but explanations. They asked why the stars had their shapes, why the seasons turned, why voices echoed in the mountains. And in answer, they told stories of Zeus and the goddesses or nymphs he pursued. Love was not merely a private affair. It was a force that touched the world, reshaping it in ways both grand and small. Yet behind all these stories, the figure of Hera loomed. To be loved by Zeus was also to invite her wrath. Many of his partners, divine or mortal, bore not only the gift of children, but also the burden of persecution. It was Hera's jealousy that drove Leto to wander, Hera's anger that cursed Echo, Hera's vigilance that made secrecy and disguise so necessary. This tension became part of the rhythm of myth, a cycle of longing, union, consequence, and reprisal. If we step back and see these myths as the ancients may have, we notice their balance of wonder and inevitability. Zeus, the king of gods, could not restrain his desires, and each desire left its mark upon the world. The goddesses and nymphs who entered his story carried away both blessings and sorrows, and the children, born from these unions, often bore destinies greater than their parents could imagine. Heroes, muses, gods, and even constellations sprang forth, each a thread in the ever-growing fabric of mythology. It is possible to drift, as we consider these tales, into a gentler frame of mind. One might picture Leto, weary and wandering, finally resting upon the shores of Delos, the cries of her newborn twins breaking the silence of the island. Or Demeter, bending over her daughter Persephone, watching her play in the meadows before fate carried her below the earth. Or Maya, hidden in her cave, cradling the mischievous infant Hermes as he plotted his first tricks. These images are not rushed or loud. They unfold slowly, like the turning of the seasons themselves. And in them, one begins to understand why the ancients told these stories in the way they did. They were not simply gossip about a god's affairs. They were ways of seeing the world, of giving shape to memory, to nature, to the mysteries of life and death. By placing Zeus at the heart of these unions, the Greeks wove together a single thread, that even the divine was entangled in longing, in conflict, in the births and losses that shape existence. So, as we listen in the quiet of the night, the loves of Zeus become not wild scandals, but gentle myths, drifting like clouds across the imagination. The goddesses and nymphs he touched, the children who came forth, the consequences that rippled outward. These are not merely stories of passion, but echoes of how the ancients understood their world. And like Echo herself, their voices still repeat, softly, endlessly, through time. Chapter 5. Mortal Women and the Reach of Power. Zeus, the king of the gods, was not only a figure of immense power, but also a god whose desires frequently reached beyond the divine realm, touching the lives of mortal women in ways both extraordinary and tragic. In this chapter, we explore these mortal affairs in depth, examining not only the encounters themselves, but also the profound consequences for those involved and the mythological ripples they created. One of the most famous mortal women to capture Zeus's attention was Alcmene, a noblewoman of Thebes. Alcmene's story is one of deception and destiny. Zeus, captivated by her beauty and virtue, disguised himself as her husband, Amphitryon, who was away at war. This act of divine impersonation resulted in the conception of Heracles, a hero destined for greatness and legendary feats. Alcmene herself was left to navigate the confusion of divine intervention and human perception, embodying both admiration and suffering. Her experience reflects a recurring theme in Zeus's mortal romances: the intersection of power, desire, and unintended consequences. Through Alcmene, the mortal world was forever changed, as her son would grow to embody the heroic ideals that bridged gods and humans. Another notable figure was Danae, the daughter of King Acrisius of Argos. Zeus's pursuit of Danae took the form of a golden shower, penetrating the chamber in which she was imprisoned by her father's fears of prophecy. From this union came Perseus, the hero who would slay Medusa and rescue Andromeda. Danae's story exemplifies the profound ways in which Zeus's interventions disrupted mortal lives while simultaneously ensuring that his offspring would leave lasting marks on human history. The awe-inspiring nature of Zeus's power was both a blessing and a burden for mortal women, as Danae's tale vividly illustrates. Semele, a princess of Thebes, provides another illustration of the perilous intersection of mortal and divine. Semele, known for her beauty and charm, caught Zeus's attention, and they became lovers. Their relationship, however, was tragically short-lived. Hera, jealous of yet another mortal rival, tricked Semele into asking Zeus to reveal himself in his full divine form. Unable to withstand the sight of Zeus's true essence, Semele perished, but not before Zeus rescued their unborn child, Dionysus, sewing him into his thigh until birth. Semele's fate demonstrates the mortal vulnerability inherent in relationships with gods, highlighting the extraordinary risks that came with attracting Zeus's interest. Europa, a Phoenician princess, experienced one of the most dramatic of Zeus's mortal encounters. Enchanted by her beauty, Zeus transformed into a magnificent bull and carried her across the sea to Crete. There, Europa became the mother of Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Sarpedon, who would grow into significant figures in Greek mythology. The story of Europa not only emphasizes Zeus's transformative powers, but also the far-reaching consequences of his actions, as her children shaped the governance and moral landscape of Crete and beyond. Leda, Queen of Sparta, was another mortal entwined in Zeus's affairs. Zeus approached her in the form of a swan, and from this encounter came the twins, Castor and Pollux, as well as Helen of Troy and Clytemnestra. Leda's story is particularly notable for the duality of mortal and divine influence, as her children played pivotal roles in both heroic legends and catastrophic events, including the Trojan War. Her experience underscores the theme of mortals serving as vessels for divine plans, often with consequences extending far beyond their own lives. Other mortal women, less famous but equally significant, also drew Zeus's attention. Many were noble women, chosen for their virtue, beauty, or social standing. Through these encounters, Zeus often fathered children who would become heroes, kings, or legendary figures, ensuring that the influence of his divine essence would permeate the mortal world. The mortal women themselves were left to contend with the emotional, social, and sometimes dangerous consequences of these unions. Some were honored, others scorned, and all were forever marked by their connection to the king of the gods. These relationships were never merely romantic. They carried implications for power, lineage, and the very fabric of human society. Mortal women were positioned at the intersection of human limitations and divine ambition, their lives reshaped by forces far beyond ordinary understanding. Whether they experienced joy, fear, or grief, their stories reflect a profound interplay between human fragility and divine omnipotence. The offspring of these mortal unions further illustrate the scope of Zeus's mortal influence. Heroes like Heracles and Perseus, as well as significant figures like Dionysus, Minos, and Helen, bridge the realms of gods and men. Their legendary deeds, rooted in mortal beginnings, underscore how Zeus's desire for mortal women reverberated across generations, altering the course of history and myth alike. These children were both gifts and burdens, embodiments of divine favor and human responsibility. It is also crucial to consider the societal context of these mortal women. In the patriarchal and hierarchical structures of ancient Greece, the influence of a god like Zeus could elevate a woman's status or imperil her reputation. While their divine liaisons brought extraordinary possibilities, they also exposed mortal women to scrutiny, jealousy, and danger. Their lives, caught between awe-inspiring divine encounters and the limitations of human society, provide insight into the complex dynamics of power, gender, and mythological narrative. The mortal women who attracted Zeus's attention were, in many ways, representatives of humanity itself. Vulnerable, perceptive, and capable of profound resilience. Their stories emphasize the human capacity to endure, adapt, and influence events in ways both subtle and monumental. Zeus, in his omnipotence, often disrupted the ordinary course of life, but through these mortal women, the consequences of his desires became tangible, shaping history, culture, and myth. Their courage, endurance, and impact continue to resonate through storytelling, highlighting the intricate relationship between divine ambition and human experience. By examining these mortal affairs, we gain a deeper understanding of the dual nature of Zeus, the omnipotent god whose desires reached across realms, and the being whose actions profoundly affected mortal lives. The mortal women who encountered him were not mere bystanders. They were central figures in the unfolding narrative, their experiences shaping the trajectory of myths and the lineage of heroes. Each story, filled with drama, consequence, and enduring legacy, paints a vivid picture of the complex web of relationships that defined Zeus's mortal interactions. Ultimately, the mortal women of Zeus's life reveal a dimension of his character that is as revealing as it is controversial. They were witnesses to his power, participants in his schemes, and mothers to his progeny. Their narratives, rich with consequence and emotion, underscore the entwined destinies of gods and mortals, reminding us that even divine power finds expression in the most human of experiences. Through Alcmene, Danae, Semele, Europa, Leda, and countless others, the mortal world was forever imprinted with the mark of Zeus, bridging the divine and human in ways that continue to captivate our imagination. Chapter 6. Children of Thunder. Zeus, the king of the gods, is often remembered for his lightning bolt, his dominion over the skies, and his many romantic escapades. Yet, perhaps no aspect of his enduring influence is more fascinating than his children, the varied progeny born of his unions with both goddesses and mortal women. These descendants, heroes, demigods, and legendary figures, served as bridges between the divine and human worlds, their deeds shaping the mythological landscape and leaving an indelible mark on ancient storytelling. In this chapter, we explore these children of thunder, examining their lives, their heroics, and the consequences of being touched by the power of Zeus. One of the most celebrated offspring of Zeus is Heracles, known for his extraordinary strength and legendary adventures. Heracles was born to the mortal Alcmene, conceived when Zeus, in the guise of her husband Amphitryon, visited her during his absence. This deception highlights the complex, often morally ambiguous methods Zeus employed to ensure his will was realized in the mortal realm. Heracles' life was marked by a series of trials and labors, imposed both by divine forces and mortal circumstance. His 12 labors, which included slaying the Nemean lion, capturing the Erymanthian boar, and retrieving the golden apples of the Hesperides, illustrate the intersection of mortal courage and divine legacy. Heracles embodies the tangible consequences of Zeus's desires, demonstrating how the king of gods extended his influence into the human sphere through the remarkable abilities of his progeny. Another prominent child is Perseus, born to Danae, who was impregnated by Zeus in the form of a golden shower. Perseus's life was equally legendary, filled with quests and heroic feats. He is most famous for slaying Medusa, the Gorgon whose gaze turned men to stone, and for rescuing Andromeda from a sea monster, acts that combined bravery, divine favor, and clever strategy. Perseus' story reflects the recurrent theme of mortal vulnerability, heightened and transformed by divine intervention, revealing how Zeus's power could shape destiny and instill greatness in those who carried his blood. Helen of Troy, one of the most famous figures of Greek mythology, was also a daughter of Zeus, born to Leda in the form of a swan. Helen's unparalleled beauty became the catalyst for the Trojan War, a conflict that drew gods and mortals alike into a tapestry of heroism, betrayal, and tragedy. Helen's life exemplifies the far-reaching consequences of Zeus's actions. His progeny were not only remarkable in ability or beauty, but also pivotal in the unfolding of historical and mythical events. Through her, we see how the children of Zeus could influence entire civilizations, inciting wars, shaping alliances, and altering the course of history. Dionysus, the god of wine, revelry, and ecstatic madness, was born to the mortal Semele and Zeus. Dionysus's life began under extraordinary circumstances. He was rescued from the death of his mortal mother when Zeus sewed him into his thigh, bringing him to term. Dionysus represents another dimension of Zeus's legacy, the blend of mortality and divinity that produces beings capable of transcending ordinary human experience. His influence extended into ritual, culture, and art, shaping human society in profound ways through festivals, cults, and the promotion of ecstatic worship. In Dionysus, the power of Zeus is manifested not only in heroic strength, but in transformative cultural impact. Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Sarpedon, sons of Europa, further illustrate the diversity and significance of Zeus's progeny. Minos became a legendary king of Crete, associated with the labyrinth and the Minotaur, while Rhadamanthus was renowned for his wisdom and later role as a judge of the dead. Sarpedon, a hero of the Trojan War, demonstrated valor on the battlefield and ultimately the tragic vulnerability of even semi-divine beings. These figures highlight how Zeus's children were often entwined with governance, law, and warfare, acting as agents of divine will in the mortal realm and reinforcing the connection between gods and human institutions. The offspring of Zeus were not solely defined by heroism. They also faced profound personal struggles, often derived from the very nature of their divine parentage. Many endured jealousy from other gods, rivalry with mortals, and the burdens of expectation imposed upon them by their extraordinary heritage. Heracles, for instance, suffered bouts of madness induced by Hera, and even great heroes like Perseus had to navigate treacherous quests to survive. These challenges underscore the dual nature of being a child of Zeus. While endowed with extraordinary gifts, his progeny were also subject to trials that tested their character, courage, and resilience. Zeus's children with mortal women, in particular, illustrate the interplay between human and divine spheres. They were born with attributes beyond ordinary human capacity, strength, beauty, wisdom, or charisma. Yet their experiences were often deeply human, encompassing fear, love, suffering, and triumph. This blend of mortal vulnerability and divine inheritance created figures who were relatable yet awe-inspiring, reflecting the human fascination with the intersection of ordinary life and extraordinary potential. Furthermore, the influence of Zeus's children extended beyond immediate heroics. Figures like Heracles and Perseus became cultural icons, their stories transmitted through generations, shaping the values, ideals, and narrative frameworks of ancient Greek society. They were embodiments of courage, ingenuity, and the capacity to overcome adversity, offering models for human behavior and exemplars of the complex relationship between mortals and the divine. Their narratives ensured that Zeus's legacy was not confined to Mount Olympus, but lived on in the mortal imagination, inspiring art, literature, and ritual. In addition to heroics, some of Zeus's children carried moral and ethical lessons. Helen of Troy's story, for example, raises questions about beauty, agency, and responsibility, while Dionysus's influence touches on the balance between order and chaos, sobriety and revelry. Each child, through their life and deeds, provided a lens for understanding human experience in relation to divine forces. The children of Zeus were not merely passive recipients of power. They actively shaped the worlds they inhabited, their stories rich with lessons about courage, morality, and consequence. Even lesser-known offspring, those who did not achieve fame comparable to Heracles or Perseus, contributed to the rich tapestry of mythology. These children often became kings, founders of cities, or heroes of local legends, their presence reinforcing the omnipresence of Zeus in mortal affairs. Through them, we see the pervasive reach of divine influence and the manner in which mythology served to explain natural phenomena, social structures, and human behavior. It is also important to recognize that Zeus's children were often at the center of conflict, both divine and mortal. Rivalries with other gods, challenges from mortals, and struggles to achieve personal identity were recurring themes. Yet, through these trials, they demonstrated resilience, courage, and ingenuity, qualities that not only defined their heroism, but also reflected the enduring legacy of Zeus himself. The children of thunder carried forward the essence of their father, a combination of power, ambition, and the capacity to leave an indelible mark on the world. In conclusion, the children of Zeus, whether heroes like Heracles, cultural icons like Dionysus, or pivotal figures like Helen of Troy, represent the enduring influence of the king of the gods across both divine and mortal realms. They embody the complexities of power, the interplay between fate and choice, and the profound consequences of divine intervention in the human sphere. Through their lives, deeds, and legacies, we glimpse the full extent of Zeus's reach, the blending of mortal vulnerability and divine potential, and the stories that continue to captivate and inspire. These children are living testaments to the breadth of Zeus's influence and the enduring power of myth to shape our understanding of heroism, morality, and the human condition. Chapter 7. Hera's Wrath and Cruel Revenges. In the mythological tapestry of ancient Greece, few figures evoke as much awe and trepidation as Hera, queen of the gods. As the wife of Zeus, she occupied a position of unparalleled authority and divine dignity. Yet her legacy is often inseparable from her intense jealousy and relentless vindictiveness. The slow, methodical unfolding of Hera's wrath reveals much about the dynamics of power, emotion, and consequence in the pantheon of Olympus. In this chapter, we explore Hera's calculated responses to Zeus's numerous affairs, examining her influence on both mortal women and divine offspring, the subtlety and severity of her actions, and the complex interplay of pride, vengeance, and justice that defined her behavior. Hera's jealousy was not impulsive. It was deliberate, measured, and often executed with meticulous care. The queen of the gods perceived her husband's infidelities as not merely personal affronts, but as challenges to her authority and dignity. Each affair of Zeus, whether with a mortal woman, a goddess, or a nymph, presented an opportunity for Hera to assert her power, demonstrating that no transgression could escape her notice. This measured approach to revenge underscores the intricate psychological landscape of the divine, where emotions are amplified and consequences are magnified, producing stories that resonate with both awe and caution. The victims of Hera's wrath were varied, ranging from mortal women who became entangled with Zeus to the offspring produced by these unions. Among the mortals, we find figures whose lives were irreversibly altered by Hera's interventions. Heracles' mother, Alcmene, endured great suffering as Hera sought to impede the hero's birth and challenge his very survival. The goddess's persistent hostility created obstacles that tested human resilience and highlighted the precariousness of mortal lives intertwined with divine affairs. In these narratives, the slow, almost inevitable unfolding of Hera's vengeance serves to illustrate the inescapable consequences of proximity to the king of gods, emphasizing the human vulnerability that exists even within the sphere of myth. Hera's actions were not confined to mortal women. The children of Zeus, despite their divine or semi-divine nature, frequently became targets of her formidable ire. Heracles, as one of the most celebrated demigods, experienced Hera's wrath in a profoundly tangible way. From the moment of his conception, Hera sought to thwart his existence, attempting to prevent his birth through divine machinations and later inducing bouts of madness that drove him to commit tragic acts. This relentless pursuit of vengeance exemplifies the interplay between personal jealousy and cosmic consequence, where the emotions of a single deity could reverberate across generations and shape the destiny of heroes. The scope of Hera's vindictiveness extended further to encompass Zeus's other children. Even those who had no direct involvement with her husband's infidelities sometimes faced her scrutiny. Through these actions, Hera demonstrated that her sense of justice and retribution was not merely reactive, but also proactive, designed to assert dominance and maintain the integrity of her position as queen of the gods. The calculated nature of these interventions highlights the strategic intelligence underlying her anger, revealing a deity capable of long-term planning, patience, and precise execution. Among mortals, the narratives of Zeus's lovers and their offspring offer poignant examples of the intersection between divine wrath and human suffering. Women who attracted the attention of Zeus often experienced sudden misfortune, inexplicable hardships, or social marginalization, frequently orchestrated by Hera's subtle influence. Even when these interventions did not directly result in death or destruction, the psychological and social pressures exerted by divine vengeance could alter the course of mortal lives in ways both profound and irreversible. These stories remind us of the delicate balance between divine favor and divine disfavor, illustrating how the presence of gods in human affairs can magnify both fortune and calamity. Hera's methods of revenge were diverse and adapted to the circumstances at hand. Sometimes her wrath manifested as direct punishment, sending monsters, afflicting individuals with disease, or imposing curses that could endure for generations. Other times, her vengeance took a more insidious form, working through manipulation, social subversion, or the orchestration of events that would lead to the gradual unraveling of her targets' lives. This multiplicity of strategies emphasizes the depth and adaptability of Hera's power, reflecting a character whose intelligence was as formidable as her divine authority. The psychological dimension of Hera's vengeance is equally significant. Her actions reveal a goddess who experienced profound emotional intensity, whose pride and sense of entitlement were intertwined with the maintenance of social and divine hierarchies. The slow, deliberate unfolding of her retribution allowed her to exercise control over events in ways that underscored her agency, demonstrating that divine power was not merely physical or magical, but also strategic, psychological, and social. In this light, Hera's wrath can be understood not only as jealousy, but as an assertion of sovereignty, a mechanism through which the Queen of Olympus preserved the order and respect due to her status. Among Zeus's mortal lovers, the effects of Hera's vengeance were often immediate and devastating. Women such as Io, who attracted the attention of Zeus, found themselves subjected to relentless persecution. Hera transformed Io into a heifer and sent her into a prolonged journey of suffering, guarded by a vigilant watchman with 100 eyes. This transformation, both symbolic and literal, illustrates the lengths to which Hera would go to punish transgression, highlighting the creative and terrifying dimensions of her power. Io's plight, emblematic of the trials faced by those who encountered the King of Gods, underscores the enduring theme of human vulnerability in the mythological narrative. Even in cases where children were involved, Hera's wrath maintained a careful balance of punishment and inevitability. Heracles, despite being subjected to divine hostility, ultimately achieved greatness, his story reflecting both the cost of Hera's vengeance and the potential for heroism to emerge from adversity. This duality, suffering and triumph, retribution and reward, permeates the myths surrounding Hera, revealing a complexity that elevates her beyond a mere archetype of jealousy. She is a deity whose wrath enforces moral and social lessons, whose interventions shape narrative trajectories, and whose presence underscores the profound consequences of divine-human interaction. Hera's influence also extended to indirect consequences, affecting alliances, marriages, and political structures within the mortal and divine realms. Her ability to orchestrate events with precision allowed her to manipulate circumstances in ways that reinforced her authority and magnified the repercussions of Zeus's actions. This long-term strategic approach to vengeance emphasizes the layered nature of her power, demonstrating that divine wrath is not merely reactive, but can be proactive, shaping the course of events over time. In considering Hera's wrath, it is essential to acknowledge the moral and ethical dimensions of her actions. While modern perspectives may interpret her behavior as vindictive or excessive, within the context of Greek mythology, her responses often reflected the expectations placed upon a queen of the gods. Her actions were rooted in a complex system of honor, status, and divine law, where personal affronts carried cosmic significance. Through this lens, Hera's cruelty is both a reflection of her personal pain and a mechanism for maintaining the balance of power within Olympus. Moreover, Hera's interventions illustrate the interconnectedness of human and divine spheres. Mortals affected by her vengeance often became participants in broader narratives, their experiences entwined with those of gods and heroes. The slow, deliberate unfolding of these stories highlights the enduring tension between free will and divine influence, emphasizing the profound consequences of proximity to power. Hera's wrath serves as a reminder that in the mythological world, every action has reverberations, and every relationship carries potential peril. Through the lens of Hera's vengeance, we gain insight into the broader dynamics of Greek mythology. Her calculated cruelty, strategic intelligence, and emotional intensity reflect a deity whose influence extended far beyond personal grievances. She shaped narratives, guided destinies, and imposed consequences that reinforce the order of the divine hierarchy. Her actions, though often severe, contribute to the richness of the mythological tradition, offering lessons about justice, pride, resilience, and the interplay of emotion and authority. In the quiet moments between her acts of retribution, Hera's character reveals a depth often overshadowed by her wrath. She embodies the complexities of power, the burdens of authority, and the human-like emotions that define the gods. Her narrative teaches that vengeance, when executed with purpose and strategy, can serve both as a personal expression and as a mechanism for maintaining cosmic balance. The careful orchestration of her interventions, the patience with which she pursued her aims, and the precision of her influence demonstrate a goddess who is formidable, intelligent, and inexorably just according to her own divine code. Hera's wrath is inseparable from her identity as queen of the gods. Her actions, whether against mortal lovers, demigod children, or rival deities, reveal a figure whose emotional intensity, strategic intelligence, and moral authority shape the world of mythology. The slow, deliberate unfolding of her vengeance provides a lens through which we can understand the dynamics of divine-human interaction, the consequences of ambition and desire, and the enduring power of narrative to convey lessons about strength, pride, and justice. In every story of Hera's wrath, we see the intricate interplay of love, jealousy, and authority, and the profound consequences of being entwined with the king of gods. Through these stories, the slow and inexorable pattern of Hera's revenge becomes clear. She is both protector and punisher, whose interventions remind mortals and gods alike that the consequences of passion, ambition, and desire are never far from reach. Her legacy endures in the tales of suffering and triumph, illustrating the complex morality, strategy, and emotional depth that define her as a goddess, whose presence remains both formidable and profoundly human in its resonance. Chapter 8. The Gossip of Olympus. In the grand halls of Olympus, where sunlight filtered through golden arches and the air shimmered with divine presence, the lives of gods were as intricate and intertwined as the threads of fate themselves. While mortals often marveled at the overt displays of power, the thunderbolts of Zeus, the commanding voice of Hera, the swift arrows of Apollo, the quieter, more subtle interactions among the deities were equally significant. These were the whispered conversations, the exchanged glances, the gentle nods and playful smirks that constituted the gossip of Olympus. In this chapter, we explore the quiet and sometimes pointed discussions surrounding Zeus's many exploits, examining how rumors, observations, and divine commentary shaped relationships, influenced decisions, and revealed the very human tendencies of immortals. The gods of Olympus were not immune to curiosity or intrigue. Despite their immense powers and elevated status, they exhibited a marked interest in one another's affairs, particularly when those affairs involved the king of gods himself. Zeus, with his famed appetite for mortal and divine companionship alike, became a frequent topic of conversation. His romantic entanglements and occasional lapses of judgment fodder for both amusement and critique. The quiet corridors of palaces, the shaded groves of sacred gardens, and the serene terraces overlooking the clouds became spaces where whispers circulated, where reputations were constructed and deconstructed, and where the seemingly minor comment could ripple outward with surprising consequence. The gossip of Olympus often began with subtle observation. A goddess might notice a fleeting glance, a lingering touch, or a hushed exchange between Zeus and another deity. These moments, seemingly inconsequential, were meticulously catalogued in the minds of onlookers. Athena, ever vigilant and thoughtful, might remark upon a suspicious absence, while Aphrodite, with her keen sense of desire and attraction, could interpret gestures of intimacy with a knowing smile. Even the lesser deities, those whose domains were tied to the elements or abstract concepts, participated in the intricate dance of observation and commentary, their insights blending with humor, judgment, and strategic consideration. Humor played a particularly notable role in the gossip of Olympus. The gods, while capable of awe-inspiring feats, were not without a sense of levity. A whispered jest about Zeus's latest transformation, a playful exaggeration of his flirtations, or a subtle pun regarding the outcome of one of his dalliances could provoke laughter that echoed softly through the halls. This humor, however, was never purely frivolous. It often carried underlying messages, veiled warnings, or subtle advice. By cloaking observations in jest, gods could communicate disapproval, caution, or admiration without overt confrontation, maintaining the delicate social equilibrium of the pantheon. Conflict, too, was an inevitable aspect of divine gossip. Conversations about Zeus's affairs frequently touched upon sensitive issues, questions of loyalty, honor, and the perceived proprieties of conduct among immortals. Hera, as queen, would inevitably respond to whispers with a mixture of vigilance and veiled threat, her reactions measured yet unmistakable. Apollo and Artemis, while often detached in their observation, could become subtly involved, their commentary informed by a desire to uphold cosmic order or moral balance. Even Hermes, the messenger, who thrived on information and communication, recognized that gossip was both currency and weapon, its influence capable of shaping destinies as much as any formal decree or divine intervention. Among mortals, the effects of Olympus gossip were indirect yet significant. Many stories, passed down through generations, bear the imprint of divine commentary. Heroes were often guided, challenged, or warned by the subtle interplay of observation and rumor among the gods. Perseus, Heracles, and Helen, though mortal or semi-divine, lived in a world constantly influenced by divine opinion. The gods' private discussions could determine whether a mortal received assistance, encountered obstacles, or became entangled in events that would define history. In this sense, gossip was a force of quiet causality, shaping the mortal realm in ways that were often invisible yet undeniably potent. The mechanisms of gossip in Olympus were sophisticated and nuanced. Deities employed indirect communication, coded language, and symbolic gestures to convey information. A raised eyebrow, a lingering glance, a seemingly casual remark could carry layers of meaning. Through these methods, gods maintained discretion, avoided unnecessary conflict, and ensured that messages were transmitted only to those who could interpret them. In this way, gossip functioned as both social lubricant and political instrument, enabling complex negotiations, alliances, and rivalries to unfold beneath the surface of everyday interactions. Zeus, despite being the subject of much discussion, remained an active participant in the dynamics of gossip. He was aware, in varying degrees, of the commentary surrounding his actions and he often engaged with it either directly or subtly. Sometimes he addressed rumors openly, using charm, wit, or authoritative presence to redirect attention or assert his perspective. At other times, he allowed whispers to circulate, recognizing that the careful management of perception could be as powerful as any thunderbolt or divine decree. His awareness of gossip underscores the interdependence of observation and action, where knowledge of social currents informed decision-making, strategy, and personal conduct. Hera's engagement with gossip was particularly strategic. As queen, she monitored both the actions and the words of those around her, using insight into private conversations to inform her decisions. Her awareness of Zeus's interactions allowed her to anticipate challenges, preempt offenses, and reinforce her authority. Moreover, Hera's commentary often carried a moral undertone, reflecting her concern with propriety, justice, and the preservation of hierarchy. In this sense, gossip was not idle chatter, but a vital component of governance, enabling the queen to exercise influence and maintain control within the complex social fabric of Olympus. The emotional dimensions of gossip were equally significant. Among gods, envy, admiration, affection, and rivalry were all interwoven with observation and commentary. A goddess might experience a mixture of irritation and fascination at Zeus's latest pursuit, while a god could admire the cleverness or audacity involved. These emotional undertones added richness and depth to the conversations, revealing the human-like qualities of the immortal characters. Far from being purely informational, gossip in Olympus reflected the full spectrum of sentiment, blending observation, judgment, amusement, and concern into a complex social dance. Some stories from Olympus illustrate the transformative power of gossip. Rumors could catalyze action, provoke confrontation, or inspire strategic maneuvering. For instance, the knowledge of Zeus's attention to a particular mortal might lead deities to intervene, either to protect the individual, to capitalize on opportunity, or to impose corrective measures. Similarly, discussion among gods could shape alliances, influence marriages, or determine participation in significant events. In these cases, gossip was a dynamic force, capable of affecting both divine and mortal outcomes in profound ways. The spatial and temporal dimensions of gossip in Olympus were subtle but essential. Conversations occurred in specific locations, quiet groves, private chambers, and secluded terraces, allowing for discretion and focused attention. Timing was equally critical. Remarks were often made with consideration of context, audience, and potential consequences. The careful orchestration of speech, observation, and reaction created a rhythm to divine interactions, a cadence that balanced transparency with secrecy, expression with restraint. In this way, gossip was an art form, a mechanism for transmitting knowledge, shaping perception, and guiding behavior. The gossip of Olympus reveals the humanity of the gods. Despite their immortal nature, their social interactions mirror those of mortals. Curiosity, judgment, pride, humor, and rivalry. Their commentary on Zeus's exploits serves multiple functions: entertainment, moral reflection, social regulation, and political strategy. Through these conversations, myths convey lessons about observation, discretion, influence, and the interplay of personality and power. The whispered stories, exchanged glances, and subtle remarks reflect a world in which knowledge is power, perception shapes reality, and even the king of gods is subject to the opinions and scrutiny of those around him. In understanding Olympus gossip, we gain insight into the rhythms of divine life, the strategies of interpersonal influence, and the subtle dynamics that govern both mortal and immortal realms. The quiet, meticulous recording of observation, the careful transmission of commentary, and the nuanced responses of the deities highlight a complex network of social intelligence. These narratives illustrate that even in a world of overwhelming power, subtlety, discretion, and awareness are as crucial as might, magic, or authority. The gossip surrounding Zeus, then, is more than mere idle chatter. It is a reflection of the interconnectedness of Olympus, the intricate management of reputation, and the delicate balance of power and emotion. Through these whispered conversations, the gods influence events, teach lessons, and reveal the underlying human qualities that render their stories enduringly compelling. In the quiet spaces between thunderbolts and divine decrees, in the soft rustle of robes and gentle laughter, Olympus lives as a realm of observation, insight, and the profound resonance of knowledge shared and withheld. Chapter 9. Lessons hidden in the myths. The tales of Zeus are often remembered for their drama, power, and sometimes scandalous escapades. Yet beneath the surface of thunderbolts and divine authority lies a rich tapestry of lessons, symbols, and moral reflections. The ancient Greeks did not craft these stories merely for entertainment. They served as tools to explore human nature, societal norms, and the consequences of desire. In this chapter, we examine the deeper messages hidden in Zeus's myths, particularly focusing on his romantic and sexual escapades, and how these narratives conveyed warnings, ethical considerations, and insights into human behavior. Zeus's numerous amorous adventures, both with goddesses and mortal women, illustrate fundamental aspects of human desire and its consequences. While he was the king of gods, wielding ultimate power over mortals and immortals alike, his passions and impulses often drove him into morally complex situations. These stories functioned as cautionary tales, highlighting how unchecked desire, whether in a divine or human context, can lead to conflict, jealousy, and unintended repercussions. Through these narratives, the Greeks communicated that even those in positions of immense power are not immune to temptation or folly, reinforcing the importance of self-awareness and restraint in personal conduct. The symbolism embedded in Zeus's love affairs is striking. His transformations, becoming a swan, a bull, or even manifesting as golden rain, serve as metaphors for adaptability, cunning, and the lengths one might go to achieve desire. Yet these transformations also carry warnings. By showing the lengths Zeus would go to satisfy his passions, the myths illuminate the complex interplay of power, deception, and consequence. Mortals and gods affected by his actions frequently face challenges, danger, or unexpected outcomes, demonstrating that pursuit of desire without consideration for others can yield suffering and disruption. These stories emphasize that all actions, no matter how divine, generate ripple effects, teaching audiences to consider the ethical implications of their desires. A central lesson in these myths revolves around the consequences of indulgence. Each of Zeus's romantic conquests led to repercussions, sometimes severe, for the women involved, for his offspring, and for the social order of gods and mortals alike. Mortals caught in these liaisons often experienced upheaval, hardship, or even divine intervention, illustrating the precarious balance between pleasure and responsibility. Similarly, the jealous responses of Hera, his wife, highlight the dangers of jealousy and vengeance when desires are pursued recklessly. The ancient Greeks thus used these myths to reflect on human emotional complexity, exploring themes of fidelity, envy, and the far-reaching impact of intimate choices. The lessons extend beyond personal morality into societal reflection. By depicting Zeus's interactions with mortals, the myths comment on power dynamics, social hierarchy, and ethical conduct. Mortal women involved with Zeus were often elevated, transformed, or challenged in extraordinary ways, revealing how interactions with power, whether divine or human, can reshape one's destiny. These narratives encouraged audiences to consider questions of justice, fairness, and the responsibility of those in positions of influence, illustrating that ethical dilemmas are inherent in relationships between the powerful and the powerless. The offspring of Zeus's unions further enrich the moral landscape of these myths. Children born from his affairs, such as Heracles, Perseus, and Helen, became central figures in subsequent tales, embodying both virtue and the consequences of their divine parentage. Their lives often illustrated the balance between inherited power and personal responsibility, teaching that greatness carries obligations and that misused privilege can provoke suffering or conflict. In observing these children navigate their destinies, audiences were offered lessons on resilience, accountability, and the interplay between choice and circumstance. Zeus's romantic escapades also serve as symbolic explorations of human psychology and emotion. The myths present desire, ambition, jealousy, and love in exaggerated divine forms, allowing audiences to examine these forces safely within narrative distance. They reveal how emotion can motivate behavior, for better or worse, and how understanding and regulating feelings is essential to personal and communal harmony. By dramatizing the consequences of unchecked passion, the stories encourage reflection on emotional intelligence, ethical decision-making, and the social impact of intimate choices. The myths also emphasize prudence and foresight. Many of Zeus's conquests required strategy, deception, and careful timing, illustrating the importance of planning and awareness in pursuit of goals. Yet, these same actions generated complications, conflicts, or wrath from others, reminding audiences that cleverness must be tempered with consideration for consequences. In this way, the tales act as lessons in foresight, teaching that ambition and desire, no matter how powerful, demand careful judgment and ethical reflection. Symbolism in these narratives is layered and intentional. Each transformation, each pursuit, and each consequence conveys multiple messages simultaneously. The swan, the bull, and other forms illustrate adaptability and cunning, while the conflicts they provoke highlight the limits of power and the moral cost of desire. The reactions of Hera and other gods serve as cautionary signals, teaching that envy, vengeance, and imbalance in relationships can destabilize not only individual lives, but also wider social and cosmic order. The myths thus operate on multiple levels, offering insight into personal ethics, social responsibility, and divine symbolism simultaneously. The consequences of Zeus's actions toward mortals provide additional lessons about consent, agency, and the ethical use of power. While divine narratives often grant the gods unilateral influence, the myths frequently depict mortal suffering or moral dilemmas resulting from interactions with Zeus. These stories encourage reflection on the ethical responsibilities of those with authority, emphasizing that power, whether divine or human, carries a moral weight. The ancient Greeks used these narratives to explore justice, fairness, and the obligations inherent in hierarchical relationships, underscoring the importance of ethical governance and compassion. Ultimately, the lessons of Zeus's romantic escapades are reflections on balance, responsibility, and human nature. They reveal how desire and ambition can generate both greatness and suffering, illustrating the complexity of human behavior through the lens of divine action. By observing the interplay between Zeus, his lovers, his offspring, and the reactions of others, audiences were invited to reflect on the nuances of power, passion, morality, and consequence. These narratives foster critical thinking, emotional insight, and ethical contemplation, demonstrating that myths are not mere stories, but enduring guides for understanding life, relationships, and society. The myths of Zeus, rich in drama and moral complexity, reveal the enduring wisdom of ancient Greek storytelling. Through the depiction of desire, pursuit, consequence, and reflection, they provide lessons on human behavior, ethical responsibility, social dynamics, and the consequences of action. Far from simple tales of divine indulgence, these stories are carefully constructed reflections on the human condition, designed to entertain, instruct, and provoke contemplation across generations. The romantic and sometimes scandalous exploits of Zeus serve as more than titillating tales. They are vessels of wisdom, moral instruction, and social commentary. They teach audiences about desire, consequence, responsibility, emotional intelligence, and ethical conduct. By engaging with these myths thoughtfully, listeners and readers gain insight into both divine and human nature, learning that power, passion, and ambition are forces to be navigated carefully and with awareness. Through the lens of Zeus's love affairs, the Greeks encoded a timeless set of reflections on morality, human behavior, and the intricate web of consequences that shape lives, societies, and legacies. Chapter 10. Shadows of a Thunder God. As the myths of Zeus unfold, they paint a portrait not only of a god in the height of power, but also of a figure whose influence stretches into the quiet twilight of his years. By this final chapter, we observe the thunderer not in the boldness of youth or the reckless pursuit of desire, but in the reflective shadow of his own legacy. Zeus, once a figure of dynamic and overwhelming energy, now exists in stories as an embodiment of duality, strength intertwined with fallibility, reverence shadowed by moral complexity, divinity entwined with human-like vulnerability. We begin by contemplating Zeus in the slowing pace of age. Though timeless in essence, the narrative of a mature Zeus allows us to perceive the residue of his long actions, the consequences of countless decisions, the ripples of desire and conflict, the echoes of wrath and reconciliation. His once fearsome storms and commanding presence are remembered as both awe-inspiring and morally complicated. In this sense, the myths convey a profound reflection on the dual nature of power. While force and authority can achieve extraordinary feats, they can also leave lingering consequences that challenge the perception of wisdom or righteousness. Zeus's relationships, both divine and mortal, continue to define his narrative even in this reflective phase. The lovers he pursued, the children he sired, and the conflicts he provoked are no longer tales of mere intrigue. They become instruments through which audiences can understand legacy and responsibility. Ancient storytellers deliberately allowed these threads to extend across generations, showing that the actions of one powerful figure can shape entire mythological landscapes. The mature Zeus, observed in this light, is not only a god of thunder, but also a symbol of enduring consequence, a cautionary figure whose every indulgence, every act of cunning or cruelty, leaves a trace upon the world. His marriage to Hera, a relationship defined by both rivalry and interdependence, exemplifies this duality. The strife between them, once vivid and dramatic, is now remembered as a complex tapestry of power, patience, and resilience. While younger versions of Zeus acted with impulsive desire, the stories of an older Zeus convey moments of contemplation and negotiation, reflecting the necessity of compromise even for the mightiest. Their interactions illustrate how power and longevity demand not only strength, but also wisdom, an ability to navigate emotional terrain, and a recognition of the moral weight carried by actions and decisions. The shadow of his exploits with mortals and immortals alike continues to cast both wonder and unease. By the time Zeus is considered in his later years, the myths emphasize reflection and acknowledgement of the intricate consequences of desire. Tales once sensationalized for dramatic effect now serve as lessons on prudence, the ethical dimensions of leadership, and the recognition that even divine impulses carry responsibility. Zeus's maturity, in this sense, is marked not by a loss of vigor, but by the unfolding of moral and psychological depth within the stories that recount his life. We also see the nuanced perception of Zeus among other gods and mortals. He remains a figure of authority, revered and feared, yet he is increasingly depicted as a god whose greatness is inseparable from the imperfections of character. Mortal heroes, children of Zeus, and even ordinary humans remember him with ambivalence, admiration for his power, curiosity or judgment for his moral inconsistencies. The Greeks, through these stories, emphasize that respect for authority does not preclude ethical reflection, and that even the supreme god embodies lessons for mortals about responsibility, consequences, and the intersection of power and desire. Aging Zeus is frequently paired with the reflection of legacy. The stories remind audiences that the outcomes of past actions persist long after the moment of their enactment. Heracles, Perseus, Helen, and other offspring of Zeus carry both gifts and burdens of their divine parentage, reflecting the enduring impact of Zeus's choices. The mature Zeus, in narrative retrospect, embodies the principle that power is inseparable from consequence. Every pursuit of pleasure, every act of wrath, every strategic deception leaves marks upon the world, and even gods are not exempt from the reverberations of their deeds. The perception of Zeus becomes increasingly complex as myths recount his aging form. No longer merely a thunder-wielding king, he becomes a figure of paradox, simultaneously majestic and flawed, protective and perilous, revered yet critiqued. Ancient storytellers emphasize this duality intentionally, encouraging audiences to recognize that greatness is multifaceted, and that moral ambiguity is inherent even in those who hold supreme power. In observing the shadows of Zeus's life, listeners encounter a nuanced narrative that balances awe with ethical reflection, wonder with the sobering recognition of human-like vulnerability in divine form. Even in these later narratives, Zeus's relationships with other gods remain a mirror of his evolving character. Disputes, alliances, and reconciliations illustrate the dynamics of social and familial interaction in a divine realm. While his earlier exploits highlight assertive action and impulsive desire, the later stories emphasize negotiation, diplomacy, and the subtle exercise of authority. This contrast illuminates the mythological understanding of leadership. True power requires not only force, but also wisdom, foresight, and emotional intelligence, particularly when the consequences of prior actions weigh heavily on both self and society. The mythic image of an older Zeus also serves as a reflection on memory and storytelling. As audiences recount these tales, they are reminded that history, whether human or divine, is composed of accumulated actions, both noble and flawed. The stories of Zeus's life encourage reflection on the long-term impact of decisions, the moral and social consequences of desire and ambition, and the ways in which reputation and legacy are constructed over time. Through this lens, Zeus becomes a didactic figure, His shadows instruct listeners not only about divine power, but also about ethical awareness, responsibility, and the interplay of actions and consequences across generations. Finally, the conclusion of Zeus's narrative in the myths encourages a gentle contemplation of human and divine nature alike. The stories of his old age, full of reflection, consequence, and ethical complexity, remind audiences that all beings, divine or mortal, exist within a web of actions and repercussions. His shadowed form, thoughtful yet commanding, invites meditation on the balance between desire and restraint, power and accountability, action and consequence. By tracing the arc of Zeus's life from youthful vigor to reflective maturity, the myths offer a layered understanding of morality, legacy, and the enduring tension between human emotion and divine authority. In closing, as we consider the twilight of the thunder god, we are invited to pause and reflect. Zeus, mighty yet fallible, revered yet critiqued, embodies the complexity of power and desire across time. His stories, filled with adventure, passion, and consequence, illuminate lessons not only for mortals in ancient Greece, but also for audiences today. The importance of responsibility, the weight of legacy, and the intricate interplay of strength, desire, and moral reflection. As we leave the shadows of Olympus and bid farewell to Zeus in his final tales, we invite you, our listener, to carry a quiet contemplation into your own life. Consider the echoes of your own choices, the balance of your desires and responsibilities, and the ways in which even small actions ripple across time. Thank you for joining us on this slow, thoughtful journey through the myths of Zeus. We hope you have enjoyed the story, and as night falls, may your mind find rest in the gentle rhythm of history. Good night, and until next time, let the lessons of the thunder god linger softly as you drift to sleep. Conclusion. A sleepy farewell from Olympus. As our journey through the life and legends of Zeus comes to a close, we find ourselves in a quiet, contemplative space above the clouds of Olympus. The stories of the thunder god, filled with grandeur, desire, conflict, and consequence, gradually settle into a soft, reflective rhythm. In this final moment, we are reminded that Zeus, for all his power and might, embodies more than the strength of a god. He represents the complex dance between authority, passion, and human-like vulnerability. From his dramatic exploits to his tender moments, Zeus's narrative offers endless fascination. Yet, as night falls and the world of myth gently recedes into memory, we are invited to consider the lessons hidden in both his triumphs and his follies. The grandeur of Olympus is tempered by quiet reflection, reminding us that even gods, in all their glory, are shaped by choice, consequence, and the echo of time. As we close the scroll of Zeus's adventures, let us pause to feel the soft hum of history, the gentle whisper of old stories carried through the ages. The god who once commanded storms and pursued desire with unstoppable force now becomes a figure of contemplation, a symbol of the enduring tension between power and morality, ambition and restraint. His tales linger in our minds like a slow, steady heartbeat, guiding us toward reflection and understanding. And now, dear listener, as the clouds of Olympus fade and the night wraps the world in calm, we leave Zeus in his quiet repose. May the tales you've heard tonight inspire thought, curiosity, and a gentle awareness of the balance between desire and responsibility. May the echoes of Olympus drift softly into your dreams, carrying wisdom as well as wonder. Thank you for listening, for journeying with us through storms and whispers, through passion and reflection. If you enjoyed this story, remember to like, subscribe, and share your city in the comments. We would love to hear from you. And as you lay your head down and drift towards sleep, may your night be peaceful, your dreams gentle, and your mind find rest in the quiet magic of myths. Good night from Olympus, and until next time, let the soft, slow rhythm of history guide you into the land of dreams.